Good evening, my friends. This is Paul, and welcome back to my next episode of ISTJ Info Dumping. Yes, I know, it's only episode 3, but I just got this new webcam, and life has happened. So, with that, I talked about what ISTJs feared in a previous episode, and in the most recent episode I did, I talked about what an ISTJ is like when they're sad. Now, I'm going to be talking about things that ISTJs hate. You thought we were unemotional? No. You'd be quite surprised what's going on all up here that's not revealed to the rest of the world. So I came up with just 10. Honestly, ISTJs are not really the type that gets super fiery angry most of the time. They're usually much more level-headed. But there are certain things that just tick them off. And if they haven't developed maturity, and especially their introverted feeling, that can cause them to just snap and lose it completely. So without further ado, in no particular order, here are 10 things that you do not want to do to get on an ISTJ's bad side. The first one is disorder. Generally speaking, ISTJs like things to be organized. What can you do with a small living space? If an ISTJ has an opportunity to have something be super in its place, symmetrical, and organized, they will do it. They're the types that'll say the volume has to be at an interval of 5 or 6 or an even number. They're the type that'll say this DVD goes here and not here. And when someone just makes a giant mess, then ISTJs will be like, I always have my phone in this place. Why'd you move it over here? And they can just completely lose their temper if you don't have things in a concise, organized manner. If something is brought to them suddenly, or if, say, people come over to the house and trash it, ISTJs aren't going to be happy about that. Now keep in mind, some of the stuff that I say is going to apply to other types. Of course, pretty much any J type hates disorder, but I'm going to be talking about what ISTJs hate, and if you happen to agree, cool. But you probably won't agree on everything I say, so let us continue. Next up is chaos and noise. Some types are really good at being in environments where they have to deal with a lot of people and a lot of overstimulation. I myself chaperone a ton of youth conferences, and so as a result, sometimes I have to put up with a lot of booming music and a lot of cheering and a lot of screaming. But generally speaking, ISTJs like things to be quiet. Generally speaking, they work very hard at their jobs, but if their job is something that involves a lot of noise, they want nothing less than to have their time of tranquility. Generally speaking, if you ask an ISTJ what their ideal location would be, it would be some place that they're familiar with that's also serene. Like if they go to the park a lot, they might say, let's just go to the park and sit down. So if you take an ISTJ to, say, a concert or something, they're likely not going to like it very much. And if they do like it, they'll probably only like it for a while and then, crash in their bed and be grumpy for the next 2 days straight because they're like, ugh, I can't take all this noise. Now, admittedly, I might be more sensitive than most ISTJs because I have Asperger's syndrome, so therefore it makes all of my senses intensified. But regardless, most ISTJs would prefer, if they do socialize, to be either in a small crowd or one-on-one. When you got a whole bunch of people talking over each other and you've got the TV turned up too loud, oh man, you're going to see an ISTJ's wrath. ISTJs don't like being surprised. Generally speaking, if you pop something on an ISTJ, especially INFJs, you particularly be watching this, last minute cancellations. ISTJs can turn it from a, what's the right phrase? From a rose to a thorn, I guess you could say. Because, let me tell you, there are days when I might come home from work and my mom will say oh, guess what, Paul? We've got company. I'll be like, what? Why didn't you tell me that earlier? What are you talking about? You never told me there. And then the reason why ISTJs get so worked up like that is because they are very meticulous about how they go through each aspect of their day and their plan, and usually their short-term plans are well thought out and organized. So when someone comes along and in the stir of the moment disrupts things without asking, an ISTJ is going to be frazzled because they don't know what to do. It would be kind of like if someone made a cake expecting to serve it at a fancy restaurant, and then the people that ordered the cake never show up. They're like, well, now what am I going to do with this cake? I don't have any room to store it. I can't put it in the freezer because I got so many other cakes being stored. This was a giant cake. Maybe it was a wedding cake to make it even worse. So, yeah, for ISTJs, it's good that you tell them things well in advance and don't try to spring things on them. Don't say, hey, we arranged for you to go camping with us tomorrow. And we're like, wait, what? I don't even like camping. Now, that's not saying ISTJs don't like little surprises. Like, they enjoy birthday presents and Christmas gifts just as much as anyone else. In fact, they're likely to be the ones that thrive on that because it's a tradition that they've grown accustomed to. But they wouldn't like it if it was sprung on them. But the reason why they're okay with that is because they know, okay, it is December 25th. I don't know what day it is for the rest of the world, but in the States, we celebrate Christmas on December 25th. And they'll say, this is the time when people give gifts for Christmas. And so therefore, I am structuredly surprised. But if, say, someone just springs a surprise party on them out of nowhere, most ISTJs are going to be less than thrilled. And they're probably going to end up being very resentful toward whoever planned it. ISTJs don't like major changes. Now, that's not saying that they're always going to do everything exactly the same, but it's pretty darn close. I know my grandfather, who I believe was an INTJ, but he's still a J, so that counts. He had a bowl of Cheerios every single day for like 50 years straight. And most ISTJs are very routine-oriented. They can sometimes get in this pattern of being in a rut where they like can't see outside of their own little pattern that they've carved, and they like it, which makes them really frustrated when other types seem to want to force them out of that rut. When I'm taking a walk with my best friend, I usually take him to the exact same location through the exact same path. Very rarely, if ever, do I deviate from the path. Usually if I do, it's only because he's talking about something that's interesting. But for so many years, I was so borderline OCD that there were so many little things that I just could not get over. Like, when I was at my young adult group, I always sat in the same seat. And when certain friends would come along and take my seat, I'd get very aggressive and I'd say, that's my seat, you hand it over. Or at the dinner table, same thing. I'd say, Mom, you know that's my seat. Don't be putting stuff on my seat. That is my chair. Again, it's kind of ridiculous. I'm not trying to say that this is a good thing that ISTJs are like this. I mean, some of them can be quite the sticks in the mud and they could deserve a reality check. I'm just saying this is... It's a show called info dumping. We're telling you what it is. We're not necessarily trying to defend it. Yeah, we can be a little bit ridiculous in our early years, like if our work hours change, or if someone gets a haircut after they've been having their hair long for so many years, they're going to be like, oh no, difference! They only like difference if they're either prepared for it or if it makes sense in the current situation. But even then, they usually have a heavy amount of nostalgia blinding. They're not likely to embrace new trends. They're not likely to go with the times. They're likely to want to stick to what they've known to be true. So, for example, if an ISTJ grew up in the era of the Nintendo 64, they're not likely to embrace the Wii or anything beyond that because they like their past and they want to keep it that way. They don't see a need for innovation. Next up is getting a little bit more into the introverted feeling side of things, where ISTJs have a deep set of morals and values that they don't usually share with the world, but they get aggressive if you go against those values. One of the things they value a lot is loyalty, or integrity, whatever you want to word it as. To an ISTJ, their word is the absolute law. When an ISTJ says, I will or I will not do something for you or to you, they mean it. They 100% mean it. And literally the only thing you could do to get them to not keep their promise is if something happened that was, say, catastrophic. Like, say, if the ISTJ got into a car wreck or they got killed. You know, ISTJs, through thick and thin, will keep their promises. Abraham Lincoln is a perfect example of that. Someone forgot a penny at his shop, and he went over the mountains and through the cold just to give back that penny. Now, not all ISTJs are going to be that extreme, but it can certainly seem like it to types that don't have introverted sensing and extroverted thinking in their function stack. Because some types, they believe that, to a certain extent, sometimes you have to tell little white lies on occasion. ISTJs are not like that. They want 100% truth. In the courtroom, this rule was probably invented by an ISTJ. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? ISTJs don't even need to swear. They're just like, dude, that's how I talk. So please do not ask me that question, because it is so stupid. So if a person betrays the ISTJ, or doesn't keep their promise, or abandons them, the ISTJ is going to have a very hard time moving on from that. Probably the hardest time of all the types, because with the introverted sensing, introverted feeling combo, that can lead to a large amount of clinginess that doesn't seem possible outwardly, because ISTJs aren't usually very good at physically expressing their love, but they can get into deep depressions if, say, someone unfriends them, or dies, or moves out of state or out of county, depending on where you live. So you usually have to be very delicate about proceeding with things. And you also don't want to say something to an ISTJ that you're going to change later. Like if you say, oh, Paul, I will never, ever go outside your boundaries, and then you don't. Or if they say, oh, Paul, I will never call you on the phone during these hours of the night. Well, you better not call them those hours of the night. Sometimes, even if you're intending something to be a joke, ISTJs will take it seriously, and they'll get very angry if you go against it. Like, for example, I might be talking to my sister, and I'll say, like, hey, if you clean your room today, I'll buy you a pack of cookies. And then she'll go clean her room. And so then I'll say, all right, get your coat on. She'll be like, well, wait, what are you talking about? I'll say, I told you I'd get you some cookies if you clean your room. She's like, Paul, I thought you were joking. I said, you don't think I'm a man of my word? I said I would get you cookies. Now, come on, let's go get you some cookies. So, even if it's intended as a joke, clarify it. Please do not force yourself to be in a position where you lie, or the ISTJ will have a very hard time seeing your good side. Going on with this trend of diss something, ISTJs also hate... I already just said that. Let's move on. Progressive thinking. ISTJs generally don't like to think about the changing of times. Generally speaking, it makes them very uncomfortable to think too far into the future. My best friend is INTJ, so as a result, that's one of our biggest conflicts, is innovation versus preservation. ISTJs often have a tendency to not like thinking too far in advance. Now, granted, there are some things that they'll plan. They're Js after all, so of course they're going to want a certain degree of structure, but they don't often long-term plan. And if they do, they usually have this mistaken assumption of this is how things are going to be all along, or if they realize that that's not the case, they'll have this doom and gloom of, oh, everything's changing and I'm so afraid. And if they're in the grip, then they'll really start being afraid. So they don't like it when people say, like, oh, times are changing and you gotta adapt with the times. Or in the dating world in particular, most ISTJs that are my age are probably, I should say if they're Catholic, they're probably going to stick to the Victorian era gentleman style of talking. They're not going to adapt to the new era of, being rude and not nodding your head or opening the door to a female. To a traditional-based ISTJ, they're going to say, oh, come on, you can't just abandon the old values. People got to have a sense of common courtesy and decency, which is in itself a dying trend, to have common sense and decency. So most ISTJs are going to be fed up that there isn't common sense and decency. See, we do have feelings, guys. ISTJs hate it when they're not 100% dependable. ISTJs are the type of personality that they don't like taking sick days, and they don't usually like taking days off. They're the type of person that Their ideal job would be something where someone calls them up or texts them, whatever the ISTJ prefers, at any time of day and just says, I need you. ISTJs like being assistants. That's why usually when you see an ISTJ in fiction, they're usually a servant of some sort. ISTJs feel like it's their duty to serve. Now, not all of them are going to be devoted to serving huge amounts of people. That's more like what the ESTJs do. ISTJs usually prefer to have like one or two people that they're extremely loyal to, and they will stop at nothing to make sure that they are providing absolute 100% what the person needs. Now, oftentimes they might not think beyond the ideal. Like, they might go just far enough to do what the person needs and then stop there. Like, if the person says, if the person's crying, they might say, can I have a hug? The ISTJ will give them the hug, then they might walk out of the room and they'll say, well, I don't just want a hug. We'd be like, well, then why didn't you say so? ISTJs like to be told what the ideal is. They don't like guessing games. So if you try to manipulate an ISTJ into trying to, say, be more emotionally supportive, it's just not going to happen. Inferior intuition is going to prevent them from noticing the hints. Especially if you're like me, and you have Asperger's syndrome, and it becomes even harder. What you want to do is, first off, watch the YouTube video The Manslater. That does a great job of describing what the ISTJ mind is like. And then after you've finished watching that, then just tell the truth. I've said that a lot in pretty much all of my Myers-Briggs videos, but if you have your ideal, don't hide it from the ISTJ, especially if you're married. If the ISTJ forgets your anniversary, which likely they won't, they have like the best memory of all the types, you need to remind them why it's important, like why you want them to get you flowers. They might not realize what the practical use of the flowers is, and they might not be necessarily 100% supportive of why you need all that extra stuff. But usually speaking, if you explain it to them properly, they'll eventually give in. Because most married ISTJs will say, well, my duty is to my spouse. And then they'll use that as a way of developing how they're using their feelings toward their spouse. I already talked about this a little bit, but the next item on my list is futuristic talking. ISTJs don't usually like talking about the future. If, say, they're about to move to a new house, ISTJs are not going to want to think about it until they have to. If a person is saying, oh, well, I'm going to graduate from college in 2 years, they're like, well, you're not graduating from college yet, kid, so buck down and do your homework. Generally speaking, ISTJs don't really look forward to things. And if they do, it's usually short-term things. ISTJs are usually about living in the moment, not as much as the extroverted sensors. They tend to get stuck in the past more often than the present, but they are way more present-oriented than most intuitive types. They prefer to take things one step at a time. They don't like it when people give them a general set of orders. They want them to say, okay, right now I want you to turn that knob. Next, I want you to get that rag wet. They don't like general stuff like make sure the shelf is clean, because they might say, well, what type of material do you want to use to clean the shelf? They're not good at figuring things out on their own. They're extroverted thinkers, not introverted thinkers. Introverted thinkers are good at that kind of stuff. ISTJs aren't. They need things explained. Now, finally, number 10 is invasion of personal boundaries. Again, this is going into the deep introverted feeling side of them. So they're not always going to be very expressive of this, but it is still a big concern of theirs if people invade their boundaries. Now, this doesn't necessarily have to be physical boundaries. A lot of ISTJs enjoy hugs, but they're very selective about who they hug. They might say, well, I'll only hug my wife, or I won't hug anyone of the opposite gender. And they usually have very good reasons for them. Usually they have to do with a level of integrity that the other types are missing. Usually they might have to do with like the greater good. A lot of times ISTJs care so much about someone, but they don't necessarily know how to express how much they care. But that can also lead into somewhat unrealistic personal boundaries. Like an ISTJ might get very uncomfortable if you try to tell them that they need to cry at a prayer meeting. They might say, well, I don't want to cry. I want to keep things to myself. Or if you force an ISTJ to go to a counselor and they don't want to spill their secrets to a random person, if you force an ISTJ to get emotional or go beyond what they're comfortable with before they're ready, that'll just do more damage than it should. Now, granted, if something is like a life-threatening, logical type of decision, ISTJs, generally speaking, are going to be okay with getting dirty because they're duty fulfillers. They're going to say, okay, well, this needs to be done, so even though I don't like it, I'll do it. But if it's something that's not of a life-threatening nature, like if someone meets an ISTJ for the first time and wraps their arms around them, that's not a life-threatening situation. That's an impulsive action. They're going to say, whoa, back off, I've never met you. And especially if they're in the Victorian era, they might get super offended if, say, you don't use common courtesy. If you don't wipe off your feet when you go into the house, they'll be upset because you're like, why didn't you respect the fact that I like my carpet clean? So generally speaking, it helps to just ask them a lot of questions. Like if you're a hugger, just say, is it okay if I hug you? And if they say no, back off. Don't try to argue it. If they say, please hang up your coat over there, hang it over there. Do not hang it on places they don't like. Again, ISTJs usually have good reason for why they do stuff. They're not like INFJs where they just say, well, I just know, or this is just the way it is. Generally speaking, they're very precise about why they want things the way that they are. Unless it's of an emotional nature, then it's a little bit harder for them. But if they see that it's important enough, they will reluctantly start talking about like, yeah, okay, here's why I'm so strict on you. And they'll say, it's because I don't want you to go through this terrible traumatic event that I did. And then you're like, wow, you secretly really cared for me all along. And I guess I'll add that to number 11 is if people don't think that the ISTJ is caring right off the bat and just think of them as this strict and unfeeling robot, ISTJs are not going to be very happy about that. Generally speaking, they want to be known as the loyal, hardworking, honest person. They don't necessarily need thanks for it, but usually they like deep down inside secretly want it. They don't want people to think of them as this emotionless drone. They want people to say like, wow, you're this great servant and you're really dependable and I can count on you for anything. If they say like, oh, you don't feel anything or you're just a rude person, that's going to deeply hurt them and you'll want to talk about it and have them explain to you, it's just because when I try to talk about how I feel, the words just have a hard time coming out. And that's really all it is. Usually, sometimes even if I want to express what I'm feeling, it's just like, I don't know how to put it into words. I'm an introverted feeler. This stuff is difficult if I don't have like a YouTube video or a stick puppet or something. Anyway, I've info dumped long enough, but I suppose that explains the timestamp well enough. You know, generally speaking, when someone is emotion dumping, they don't necessarily keep track of the clock. But I'm an ISTJ, so I am going to keep track of the clock. And so before this turns to 25 minutes, I just want to say thank you to anyone who watched this all the way through. If you have any questions, I might make that into episode 4. And until the next time, keep the faith, stay epic, God bless, and ISTJs are dependable people. You should ask them for favors more often. They love doing it. Bye!